Okay, let's do this. Treating our water, it can get confusing. Hang on, it's gonna be a bumpy ride. Let's go. So as I said, I feel like water treatment, dealing with your water in the backcountry used to be easier. Having done this for more than 20 years, I feel like it's gotten more complicated. So let's talk about dealing with water in the backcountry. I would say 50% of the time when I'm kayaking, I'm bringing in my own water. So it's tap water, it's safe to drink. But 50% of the time I'm filtering water. In Prince William Sound, there's plenty of options for water, and it's usually running right into the ocean. So you just paddle up to it, fill a bag, and then filter it when you get back to camp. Water is here, that's our kitchen sink. And then this is water that still needs to be filtered. But frequently, it's stuff like this. It's relatively small feeds of water that are generally trickling towards the water or the ocean or the lake that you're paddling in, or you're just straight up backpacking, and this is the kind of water you're dealing with. So most of the information that I'm going to give you today is straight from the CDC's website. A little bit of information that I'm going to give you today is from the University of Minnesota, which has, for some reason, done a lot of research on backcountry water. And then some of what I tell you today is going to be stuff that I've learned working for Knowles and working for REI. They both deal with water in the backcountry differently. And the real problem is not everyone agrees with everyone, and that's what makes it confusing. So the first question you might be asking yourself is, do I really need to filter my water? And the answer is, I don't know. There's never been a full-scale study done of the water in North America or even in the United States. And so information that we have is anecdotal. And even if we did a study, it would change over time. So the answer is maybe, but I think you're better off treating than not treating, just because if you don't treat and you get an effect from a bacteria or a protozoa, the consequences are pretty bad. So it's relatively inexpensive now to get a filter. It's relatively quick to filter your water. I always filter my water, and I think it's a good idea. But do you actually have to? I don't know. So this really should be pretty easy. You should have a list of things that will make you sick in the water, and then a list of ways to deal with the water. And it should be easy. This handles this handles that, but it's not. Let's first talk about the things in the water that we're worried about. I'm not talking about things like E. coli or salmonella. I'm talking about the things in the backcountry water that is problematic. The most common, we think, is Giardia, which is let's see if I remember this without my notes, a parasitic bacteria that gives you watery diarrhea and maybe vomiting. The second most common is Cryptosporidium, which is generally called crypto. It is a hard-shelled parasite. It's actually a cyst. It's a hard-shell cyst that is parasitic. That hard shell makes it really hard to treat with some of the methods. It's the more difficult one to deal with. This will also give you watery diarrhea. And according to the CDC, from 2001 to 2010, Cryptosporidium infected more people in a recreational setting like this than anything else. So crypto is a tough one. And my concern with both of these is dehydration, severe dehydration from really bad diarrhea. The third one that we worry about a little bit, I generally don't really worry about this one, but some people do, are viruses in the water. In North America, we tend to not have viruses in the water, so I tend to not worry about it. If I were going to a country where they didn't do a good job of segregating human waste from drinking water, then I would be worried about viruses in the water. So I worry about viruses in the water in the United States when we see hurricanes like the one in Houston a few years ago, where there was like 3 feet of vertical water rise, where all the sewage systems were flooded and overflowing. That's where I start worrying about viruses. Okay, so those are the 3 things that we worry about in the water. We've got a couple of ways to deal with our water. The first is we can filter our water. So filtering is using a membrane of some sort, the hollow fiber membrane like I talked about, or sometimes it's charcoal. Sometimes a couple companies used to use ceramic, and a couple companies used to use glass fiber paper. So there are a bunch of different ways to filter water, and essentially under pressure, you're forcing water through that membrane, and the pores in the membrane are so small it won't let things through. Treating water has gotten complicated enough that I need my cheat sheet for this. I should say that the CDC has a really nice chart, which you can download, and I agree with just about everything on it. When we're talking about filters, the CDC says that filters do not get viruses. They do get Giardia, they do get crypto. And this is wrong because there are a handful of filters from Grail, I believe, and then the MSR Guardian both get viruses. And I'm pretty sure Sawyer makes did make a viral level squeeze filter, but it was harder to squeeze. The other way we can deal with water is chemically treating them. And this is really confusing because there's mixed information as to what chemicals can do what. By far the most common is iodine. I particularly saw this when I lived in the South, which I did until just recently. Iodine is very popular. I think iodine is a complete waste of time. I find iodine the most confusing because the iodine packaging and the CDC say different things. And actually, Knowles says different things as well. And so the CDC says that for Giardia, iodine is questionable. It will work, it will not. The iodine packaging says that it will get Giardia. It will absolutely not get cryptosporidium. It does not have enough time to get through that hard shell. And the iodine packaging says it doesn't get viruses. And the CDC says iodine does get viruses. You see how confusing this can be? I think that it gets viruses at certain pHs, which for me essentially means it doesn't get viruses because who's checking the pH of their water? But according to the CDC, it gets viruses. It may get Giardia. It does not get crypto. It's the exact same breakdown for chlorine. So it gets viruses. It may get Giardia. It doesn't get crypto. However, chlorine dioxide, which is Aqua Mira and some other products, gets viruses, gets Giardia, may get cryptosporidium, and I think if you let it sit longer than the 30 minutes that Aqua Mira says to leave it, that it will get cryptosporidium. So those are the three primary chemicals that we use to treat water. You could also boil your water, and boiling your water works perfectly, gets rid of everything, but it uses fuel, and then you have to wait for the water to cool. So that's a little problematic. Boiling, as I said, gets absolutely everything, but the CDC says to have your water at a rolling boil for 1 minute or 3 minutes if you're above 6,500 feet. I was taught that most pathogens are killed at 185 degrees, and by the time you get to 212, everything has been killed. Take that with whatever grain of salt you want, but that's sort of how I live my life. Honestly, my favorite, which is one of the reasons why I like paddling in cold, wet places, is rainwater is completely drinkable. Whenever I'm in Alaska where it rains for a while, I will put out a pot to catch rainwater, and that water, because it's gone through an evaporation cycle, so it evaporates, it becomes a vapor, and then recondenses and becomes a liquid, that is purifying it through that process. The one thing to be careful, the two things to be careful with Sawyer water filters is don't let them freeze if there's water in them. They're what's called a hollow fiber membrane filter. So they have these thousands of little hoses in them with an opening on each end and then tiny pores on the sides. And if those have water in them and they freeze, they'll rupture. And if they rupture, they're no longer filtering. The other thing that concerns me with Sawyer water filters is that when you fill the bags, the bag itself is being immersed in water that may have Giardia or crypto or viruses. And the outside of the bag then has that on it. And then you touch your face or something, then you ingest the pathogen that's making you sick. And so if you're using a Sawyer water filter and you are submerging the bag, which you kind of have to, you have to make sure you're washing your hands when you're done and probably wiping down the bag as well. So I pretty much exclusively filter. As I said, generally don't worry about viruses in my water, and I almost exclusively use a Sawyer water filter. When I am cooking, because that water is going to come to a boil either in a pan or a pot, I generally don't filter that water. So that's one less thing that I have to worry about. I generally don't like the hassle of using chemicals, though I used them for a long time when I taught kayaking with Knowles, because that's what Knowles uses. Knowles uses Aquamira. And I think Aquamira is a great product. But I've come to be wary of what it's actually getting. Their website says that it gets less than like REI's website says. I think it's a good idea to have a backup for your filter, however you're planning on doing it, so that if one system doesn't work or one system breaks or whatever, you've got a backup. And I think chemicals are good for that because they're relatively lightweight. This is sort of the confusion factor that you don't really know who to trust or who to believe in these situations. So that's how I handle water in the backcountry. I think you need to take this seriously. Diarrhea in the backcountry is a real medical emergency, so you want to evacuate that person that has it. Good hand hygiene is super important as well, so wash your hands and use hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer on its own doesn't really do much. You've got to do both. I think that's about it. If you found this helpful, man, I hope you found this helpful because it's confusing. If you found this helpful, do me a favor, hit like, hit subscribe. You can buy me a coffee on Coffee, links down below. My books are available on Amazon. All right, I'll see you outside.